Hi, welcome to the monthly portfolio update. As usual, I hope you'll find this information useful and entertaining, but disclaimer, please note that this is not investing advice. It's just my portfolio as it stands on Saturday, July 1st, and it can change at any time without previous notification. Following an investment strategy without doing the work yourself is almost guaranteed to result in losses. So please be careful, since it's your responsibility to do your own research before investing. Closing a very busy trading month, probably the busiest since I started the channel a year and a half ago. This month I continued my dollar cost averaging strategy for buying Romanian stocks since US technology got somewhat expensive with the recent rally. So in June I added to my BRD, MedLife, Aquila and Fondul Proprietatea positions and bought two new stocks. Firstly, I participated in the Hidroelectrica IPO, more on this later, and also added Meta Estate Trust, a real estate company, on my watch list. I did not sell anything this month. In terms of cash flow, I received dividends from 5 assets: Aquila, Fondul Proprietatea, BVB, Nuclear Electrica, and the Q2 quarterly S&P 500 dividend. This month and the next will be cash flow positive with lots of dividend and bond coupons expected, so I hope to rebuild my cash reserves. This month was announced the biggest IPO ever in Romania, which should help increase liquidity for the whole market and maybe help the Romanian stock exchange to be upgraded to an emerging market, which is excellent news. The company, Hidroelectrica, is a Romanian hydropower producer which covers some important checkmarks: green energy, highly profitable, and will distribute a high dividend. The yield is about 90%, and also it showed a good profit for Q1 2023. So there is a high percentage yield, but over high sum, which is good news on top of better news. The company is relatively cheap compared with other hydroelectricity producers from the EU, and surprisingly, it came in the public offer with a high discount to NAV, evaluated by KPMG at somewhere around the 14x price per earnings, with a illiquidity negative factor applied, and actually ended up with a much lower PE ratio of 8.6 if the listing is gonna close at 94 RON a share, or 10.2x if the listing is gonna close at the maximum price of 112 RON per share. Next, let's talk a bit about Fondul Proprietatea, which is a listed company priced at around 2 RON per share before the Hidroelectrica IPO was approved, and it sells between 17.34 and 19.94%, which represents all of its shares of Hidroelectrica, representing approximately 75% of its whole portfolio, and, very important, it will distribute the profit as a special dividend this year. This year, Fondul Proprietatea will also return a lot of special dividends, including the Hidroelectrica 2022, basically last year's dividend, which is somewhere around 860 million, which means approximately 0.1284 RON per share. Also, they will receive some money for the sale of the Enel subsidiary to PPC, which represent approximately 650 million or 0.09 RON per share. This is expected to happen maybe sometime in September, October this year. And lastly but not least, the Hidroelectrica sale, which is estimated between 8.43 billion and 10 billion for the whole package of 1994, resulting in an approximate dividend per share of between 135 and 161 RON per share. So we have a worst case scenario. Basically, the sale is at the lower end of the price, and the best case scenario, the sale will happen at the high end of the price, and the total dividends received this year will be somewhere around 1.57% per share and 1.83 per share. Now these values were estimated, and I tried to deduct a little bit from the gross values, because there are taxes, commissions, remuneration, but they might vary slightly. What we need to take into consideration is that after all this is said and done, Fondul Proprietatea will still own other assets representing 24.5% of the Hidroelectrica pre-IPO value. So somehow this is gonna be a bonus left in our portfolio. As I am writing this, the Fondul Proprietatea stock has a minus 2.7% drop, but at the maximum point of pessimism, it was down about 8.3%. Not a great start. It reminds me of the Simpsons meme, haha, chuckles, I'm in danger. There is an inside joke in the value investing community. As value investors, we have to endure some short-term pain before we can actually, well, endure some long-term pain. The idea is to endure some short-term pain, then make profits, but actually is something more like endure short-term pain happily, then endure some long-term pain, then become uncertain and reevaluate your thesis. As Monish Pabrai says, when the stocks fall 40% after you invest, that's when you will know everything about the business. Then, eventually, you get out on the other side, beaten up, but making a significant profit. In the end, based on my calculations, I think that I should make a profit somewhere between 3 or 5% and 16%, depending on the final IPO closing price. But we'll have to wait and see. The second step, which was logical, was that I participated in the IPO because the valuation was much cheaper than I anticipated. Now, Hidroelectrica represents 2.16% of my portfolio, but most likely will be oversubscribed by probably 5 times, meaning that it will get less shares than I placed orders for, somewhere approximately 20% of the shares that I placed orders for. As mentioned before, this is a very good valuation and a good long-term bet, and it's also somewhat of a hedge on the Fondul Proprietatea play. And last but not least, I dollar cost average other oversold stocks which people sold in order to be able to participate in the IPO, and actually provided some cheap buying opportunities in the market. Now that you understand my arbitrage strategy, now let's talk a little bit about the risks and the lessons. The first risk is, of course, the IPO might fail, which looks very unlikely now. The discount applying to the remaining Fondul Proprietatea assets might not cover the spread between my current purchase of 1.9994 RON per share and the return cash that I mentioned, which ideally should be 0.1 RON, which again is the difference between the return cash and the purchase price. Of course, there is also the possibility of Hidroelectrica price to go down significantly after the IPO, but I am not in a hurry to sell if that happens. Now, some lessons that I think are important that I didn't know before coming into this arbitrage opportunity and that I learned later. Now, first, I think there is some insider trading after the prospectus was sent to ASF, which is basically the Romanian SEC, experienced a sharp sell-off of Fondul Proprietatea shares. At that time, there was no reason for that to happen unless someone knew that the price per earnings ratio was actually smaller than anticipated. Secondly, Franklin Templeton, which is the company that is actually the portfolio manager of the fond proprietatea companies, applied a high discount to the shares, not maximizing shareholder value. Now, again, as I said, because of the oversubscription, I think that it will have been able to get a highly price per earnings ratio, maybe 11-12%. And last but not least, arbitrage isn't as easy as the math will have you believe. And the best example right now internationally is the Microsoft Activision buyout, which seems to be blocked right now, and it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. A very busy month with lots of analysis, calculation and transactions, but now let's get back to our regular programming. This is my portfolio as of July 1st. Overall, the actively managed portfolio stayed somewhat flat at a slightly positive value with 0.05% profit. But the overall portfolio is doing much better for the year, being up 3% currently, plus the fact that it does not include my living expenses. So overall, it worked quite well. How can the difference between the actively managed portfolio and the overall portfolio be so high? It's because when you make a big volume of transactions, you move money from one part of the portfolio to the other, and actually the actively managed portfolio is very close to the invested money because you just moved it from one part to the other. Anyway, very happy with this month. I hope that the rest of the year is gonna be the same. To end, here is the portfolio allocation pyramid. You could see the changes that I mentioned. The biggest ones being the increase in value stocks, both organically by the prices going up and the purchase of Hidroelectrica IPO. And of course, that is more or less visible in the cash position, which went down with the same amount that the value stocks went up, more or less. Cash position is now lower than last month, but because of the cash flow which should come next month, this is not a problem and it will be back to a satisfactory level soon enough. I will update you next month on how the IPO concluded, but in the end, as far as George Soros is concerned, when you're right on something, you can't own enough. So, it's not whether you're right or wrong, but how much money you make when you're right and how much you lose when you're wrong. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next month.